Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I've now got 2 minutes past the hour on my clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Although those of you who might have heard me on a webinar or spoken to me before might be able to tell I am trying to speak slowly because I usually speak much faster, but I'll try and speak a bit more slowly, at least for these next few minutes, while there might be others still joining the webinar. Nonetheless, I think it's time to kick off because I do appreciate all of you who have joined so punctually, and we do really value your time. We'll try to give you at least another sort of 5, maybe 15 minutes back at the end of the hour, so you have a bit of time before your next calls or other appointments and meetings. But we do appreciate you joining us today to talk about the benefits of offering menopause support in the workplace. My name is Eileen Burbidge. I'm the Executive Director here at Fertifa. I'll talk a bit about Fertifa, but we are a London-based organization that provides employee benefits, which are in the form of well-being support, navigational advice, and financial services support as well to companies that are providing support for their employees for all of reproductive, hormonal, sexual health, fertility, family forming, and neurodiversity. I'm joined today by our medical director, Gidon, and I will let Gidon introduce himself. But before I do that, so I'm sorry, I introduce myself, Gidon, and then I'll let you introduce yourself. And I'm also going to display a poll at the same time, if you don't mind. So while people are listening to your background, because I should have done this when I was talking, I'm going to do a poll just so that we can frame maybe the conversation for people. Is that all right?
Lovely.
Thanks, Gidon.
So hello, everybody. I'm Gidon Lieberman. I'm medical director here at Fertifa. I'm a consultant obstetrician, gynecologist, and reproductive medicine specialist, so dealing with all things hormonal, fertility, and menopause. I've been with Fertifa for 3 years, and I've been doing fertility and menopause as a subspecialty since 2004. I'm a jobbing, working, coalface NHS consultant alongside my role here at Fertifa. And it's really good to be able to talk today with you, Eileen, about the interaction, the interaction between menopause and the workplace.
Thanks, Gidon. Gidon's being really modest because actually I would sort of talk about him as being one of the OGs of reproductive health, and really, really think that he has underplayed everything that he does for us here at Fertifa as well. But thanks for being with us, Gidon, and I'm really glad that you're here because I think when we're talking about the benefits of offering menopause support in the workplace, what's really important is that we have an opportunity to talk about what a woman goes through, medically, clinically, and what some symptoms might be when going through the menopause. So thank you so much for joining us. And sorry, I fumbled the poll. Those of you might have recognized it. I think I had somebody who was really, really sweet and actually very kind and generous and actually answered it when it was the placeholder poll. But I've clearly now put up the actual poll. And we've got more than 80% participation already, but hopefully the rest of you will also kind of chip in as well. You'll see that in order to frame our conversation, we thought it was useful to ask all of you whether or not you're already feeling like you're familiar with what menopause symptoms look like in the workplace, because if, as is the case, was the case at some point, 100% of you said that you were, or 100% of you said that you weren't, that would maybe frame how much time we're going to spend on that. And then we wanted to know how many of you have a workplace, either you're in the HR or the people department, or you're an employee there, where there's already a menopause policy in place. So we're nearly at 90% participation, which is brilliant. Thank you so much. I will not wait necessarily for it to go to 100% because I'm assuming that we might have some Fertifa colleagues that are also here and not wanting to take the results. But I'll give it another 10 seconds, me talking really slowly until we show the results. So while I'm waiting for that, see if anyone else is going to answer the poll, I should also include or mention some housekeeping rules. So I've already talked about timings. We're going to try and give you at least 5, if not 10 or 15 minutes back at the end of the hour. We are going to talk through a few points that I'll outline and always leave time for Q&A at the end. But both Gidon and I know this, I can speak on his behalf on this point, would very much value questions as we go. This is a webinar versus, say, a lecture, and we mean that because we want it to be as engaging and interactive as possible. Gid and I have the privilege of talking to each other pretty regularly, but also we can get a hold of one another when we want to. And so us talking to each other is not really necessarily valuable or interesting at this point for either one of us. We're really interested in hearing from you and making sure, at least from my point of view, that we glean Gidon's expertise, for example, for things that you all might be thinking about or have questions relating to. We'd also like to hear your experiences, because much of what we do for our workplace clients and obviously our patients is based on the experiences that we have with our other patients and our other clients. And we're always looking to add to that data set and to better inform ourselves. So, we'd really like to hear what views you have, what experiences you all have, again, what questions you might have, what lessons learned, and advice and suggestions you'd have for us or for other participants. To that point, the Q&A is available for you to ask questions at any time. And again, we hope that you won't wait till the end of the conversation and do that as and when something occurs to you. You can have the option to make sure that your question is anonymous. And the reason that's important is because I should have started by saying that this session is being recorded. So the webinar is going to be recorded and preserved, and therefore watched back for anyone who wasn't able to make this day and time. So do feel free to use the anonymity if you have a question that you want to ask and you're not interested in sharing your personal details. We also have the chat enabled, and I have enabled that so that all of you can chat with everybody else as well. So we're not restricting it so that you can only chat with Gidon and myself. If you post something in the chat, you can ask questions of all the other attendees and participants as well. But note that your the identity that you use to register or to log into Zoom will be visible through the chat. You can make yourself anonymous if you're going to ask a question in the Q&A. We now have more than 90% participation, so I think that's brilliant on the poll. And I think I've wrapped up on my housekeeping points, so I will show the results of the poll. And it does look like brilliantly, actually we got 100% actually answered, that almost 80% said that you're aware of what, or you're familiar with what menopause symptoms look like in the workplace, which is absolutely brilliant. Does make me question whether we've got a lot of attendees that are from particular sectors, if they're from the corporate world versus, say, maybe a retail environment or otherwise, but we'll delve into that. And I hope you all sort of chime in when we come to that. So 78% have said that you're familiar with what menopause symptoms look like in the workplace. 22% aren't sure. We've got no one who says no, so appreciate that. And we will then therefore talk about some of these symptoms in detail. And then this is more interesting because it's very much split between whether or not the workplaces you all come from, represent, or work at already have a menopause policy in place. So more of you than the other options say no, that's half. About 40% of you say that you do. And actually technically 11%, as you can read, are not sure, which is also really telling because, as we all know, you lose the benefit with a little b of having a policy in place if people aren't aware that it's there and in place. So thanks so much for sharing your views on that. And I think that will inform how Gidon and I, how much time we spend on various things. But given all of that, do you want to talk about then what we think about in terms of the most common symptoms? And again, many of you, if not all, but most of you said you're familiar with what these can look like in the workplace. But I would like to sort of just have a quick primer, I guess, or a run through. And certainly from Gidon's point of view, from a medical professional's point of view and clinician who's helped people, so many people through menopause, what you think are the most common symptoms of menopause in terms of impact or relevance to a workplace or one's work and productivity.
Hi, Eileen, thanks. When we're doing that summary, I just kind of wonder if we should then just dive into a little bit more detail and asking people what actually they think the most important aspects of menopausal symptoms affecting the workplace are. I think it's really interesting. So when we look at all menopausal symptoms, and specifically those that affect the workplace, the biggest most important group of symptoms are associated with heat control or what we call vasomotor control. So during the menopause, the body appreciates or works with its own internal thermostat in a different way. It seems to go awry a little bit, resulting in this thermoregularity dysfunction. internal heat. Now, I was talking to somebody the other day, and she said to me, I feel like my bones are boiling. And that kind of, I thought, God, that's really quite a striking image. And then with the boiling bones, it then results in the body trying to lose heat through the skin. So sweating, uh, generally back, chest, face, neck, sort of red neck, and flushing of symptoms. So it's like it's feeling of intense burning inside and then sweating, trying to rid themselves of the temperature. That thermoregularity, that vasomotor symptomatology, is most common and most severe around the year before, a few years before, a few years after the actual last menstrual period. Most women, it settles down, but I've certainly got lots and lots of women in their 60s plus who's come to clinic still with this very difficult symptom. So it's the thermoregularity, the vasomotor symptoms, that is the most common and significant symptom in and around the menopause that causes problems at work, but there are lots of other ones. So if we think about from the head down, there's the mood disorder, the flipping of mood from anger to sad, irritability, the emotional side, palpitations. We think about the physicality, the skin itching, hot flushes again, sweating. We think about skin issues in other parts of the body, vaginal dryness, uh, vaginal discomfort, bladder issues, urgency to go to the loo. But it's the vasomotor symptoms that historically have always been the most important. When you read sort of the literature about it, there is very little actually written about lack of concentration and what's called brain fog. And I think that that's actually a really unreported um, symptom affecting women in the workplace. And going through the literature, there's just very little significance given to this. But actually, when you listen to women, it's quite a big problem and quite an important problem. Um, and when I'm thinking about symptoms in the workplace, because there's so many symptoms that have the effect, well, I kind of, in my own mind, I think about symptoms that directly affect the workplace. So the vasomotor symptoms, I think, is an important one. I think about flipping of mood as an important one in the workplace. So these, like, I call them the primary work symptoms. And then there's also the secondary stuff, secondary symptoms, stuff that is happening outside work that we bring into work because none of us are able just to switch off the minute we go into work. So all the stuff that's happening at home, our relationships are affected by mood, things like libido, sleep, very important. If I'm not sleeping well, I carry that into work, really important. I just kind of think that all my patients have a bit of a sleep disorder, and it affects them sometimes more, sometimes less. So we've got these symptoms that affect women directly in the workplace and stuff that's happening outside of the workplace that's coming into work. So there's a lot in that pot. There's a lot in that pot to think about, but that's kind of the way that I think about it.
Thank you. And we've worked together for so long, and I don't think I've ever heard you describe a hot flush that way. I still don't know what medical term you used for that, but it sounded really impressive. But I really personally appreciate what you said towards the end there, because for me, the physical, it's interesting. I was sort of analyzing myself, the physical manifestations of it, and I've been on HRT now for close to 2 years, very much in perimenopause and very much experienced a number of symptoms. But it's almost as if the physical ones I can deal with, if that makes sense. If I'm feeling a hot flush or I'm feeling palpitations, I will maybe take a deep breath. I will maybe step outside. I will maybe fan myself, just sort of take a minute, because it's there, it's obvious, and I feel like in a physical way, one typically, even if it's super uncomfortable, very distracting and affecting productivity, you know how to mitigate that, because if you're hot, you try and get cool. What's really been debilitating for me when it comes to work, being motivated about it, being productive, really making strong contributions that, you know, I'm used to, has been those other symptoms. So as you mentioned, the brain fog, the forgetfulness. I used to have a reliable memory. I would never be able to say that anymore. And somebody has very kindly mentioned in the Q&A anonymously that for them, as you said, would also affect people, is the sleep disorder. And actually they described also personality change. And so somebody else is now saying that they're agreeing with what I said. They're saying the physical manifestation of physical symptoms are peanuts. I'm not sure I'd say that, because they can be really difficult and grating and really, really annoying. But you know how to manage that, especially given how much life we've lived and our age. You know, if something, you know how to mend something when it's physically present, whether that's a paper cut or an injury or feeling too hot. And so for me, I really struggle with the I don't know if psychological is the right word, but the ones that manifest themselves in terms of how we think and how we're used to our own behaviors. You know, how we typically handle stress, how I might react in this particular situation, whether, you know, if someone's aggressive, you know, do I respond with aggression versus how I might normally try and stay calm and be polite and the like. So yeah, I really think that those are the most challenging symptoms. And I appreciate your point in mentioning other sort of secondary points. You know, low libido might not, you know, actually affect somebody at work, especially if they have an office job versus maybe one of another kind. But if that's affecting home life, if that's affecting our private life, if that's affecting our relationships, if that's affecting how we sleep, that is surely going to be difficult to shed or to overcome in a work situation as well, right? So it is this complete view of all the symptoms. Is there anything else that you think, when you have spoken to, you know, women in clinic or patients that we've seen, that have surprised you or that have affected workplace, that you think is typically not covered? I think we probably talked about the most common, which is what we want to hit on. I mean, we both know there's over 30 symptoms, so I don't want to go through a running commentary of all of them. But before I moved on to the other section, which is, now that we've covered this ground and talking about what menopause support can look like, wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to add, Gidon.
I think that this change in person. So how many times have I spoken to clients in clinic, or you spoken to friends who say, this is just not like me. This is not who I am. This is not what I am. And that's really important, because we want to be pretty constant in the workplace. And I think what's really also important, and you were just alluding to there, is that you can't separate. It's impossible to separate the mind and the body. And by that, I mean, if there's really good evidence that stress, sort of workplace stress, home stress, affects symptoms. You kind of know that because if you're under pressure and you're stressed, you will have more vasomotor symptoms, and you will have more problems with hot flushes with this heat. So it's actually this interplay between the work environment and symptoms, and you can't completely separate them. They're not separate, and they are very much intertwined. And so when we talk about the workplace and symptoms, it's this two-way thing: symptoms affecting work and work affecting symptoms. And we just need to think about that as a whole. And of course, we can't rid ourselves of stress in our workplace. That would be so wonderful, but we can't. So we just need to think about ways of addressing stressful triggers in the workplace, and just trying to mitigate that as much as possible.
Yeah, and thank you for kind of saying it, because that's where our starting point is, isn't it? It's well-being support. That's the whole point of well-being support. So it's a great place to sort of wrap everything up in, which is anything that contributes to stress is going to be debilitating. And so that's what we're looking to address. And if it's attributed to menopause or perimenopause, that's what we're here to talk through. So taking that then, and then segueing into, I think, the biggest topic we wanted to cover today, and what the title of the session alluded to, is let's talk about some of the types of support then a company can provide. I think we would start from a Fertifa point of view by suggesting that the first port of call and the very first action that a workplace can do is actually implement or articulate and document a policy. And I say that because a policy can be as short or as long, and as high level or as detailed as an organization would like it to be. But simply having a policy in place is the very first step. And I think the sort of bare minimum to signal to say, we have considered that this is a very relevant and important thing for women in our organization. Now, again, the length and the depth and the detail of it might reflect then how important they think it is and how much time has been spent. But it signposts it. It says, we are aware of this. We're mindful that this might matter to you. And we want this to be a safe space for you to know that we are mindful and aware. And as a starting point, I will say that for me, that's opening the floodgates, that's opening the door. And that does really help. That probably covers, I don't know how you'd quantify it, but clear, up to the majority of the anxiety, the concern, and the stress that somebody might have when going through perimenopause. Just to know that it could be normalized as a conversation topic. It's not, alienating them from the rest of the workplace, for example, is what I think. So I'd start by suggesting that the very first step in terms of workplace support for menopause is getting a policy in place. I wonder what you think about that, Gidon, if you have any suggestions of what should be included then in a policy, how to consider when one wants to pull a policy together or anything else like that.
Yeah, so I think the policy is really important, and it starts from the open culture in the workplace, and as we say, and we keep on going back to, it's actually normalizing. It's a normal. Every woman, every person with ovaries will have a menopause at some point. It's normal for those ovaries to stop working, and the symptoms and problems that come with it affect every individual in that place, and actually every individual that works with women. So it's a normal thing. It's a menopause. Can we say it's a healthy thing because it's a normal thing? Is it healthy? Well, it's a natural thing anyway. And so we have to have an environment within the workplace that is open to discussion, and that it's okay. And recently there's been more and more focus on legislation to bring openness and fairness into the workplace. And I think part of that is to recognize on the very top line, no bullying, no harassment of individuals that are going through the menopause or the transition. And it's really important that we go from the top down. And it's important that we create spaces and an environment where discussion can happen from a doctor's point of view and from an educational point of view. I think it's the provision of education that is unbiased, that isn't particularly directed against put down one way or the other. So I think there's so much social media about the benefits of one type of therapy or another type of therapy, but actually medical therapy or supplement therapy or any type of therapy is just one of the many ways that people can be supported through the menopause. So yeah, it's this open culture, it's the fairness and equity, and also from my side, the provision of information that's unbiased, that's informative, and actually helps people.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And I want to actually highlight, I mean, everything you said, I think is really important, and I wholly agree with it all. But I really want to underscore one of your points, which was the equitable piece and the inclusion piece, because I think we maybe sometimes forget this. And I alluded to this when we saw the poll responses about whether or not, we've got a breadth of industries or sectors or types of workplaces reflected here in the attendees. But I think it's really important to be mindful that you want policies, any policies, it's not even related to menopause, to be really fully inclusive. And everyone probably experiences menopause slightly differently. And so policy shouldn't presume that people are going to go through it in the same way, at the same rate, the same times of their lives, to the same degree. Some may have no symptoms, and some may have really excruciatingly debilitating symptoms. Gideon, we were speaking earlier about the disparity and the impact on certain demographic groups over others. And I just think it's worth highlighting, to your point about the inclusive nature of a policy, that the policy is very explicit about being inclusive and accessible to everybody, and understands that everyone's being considered, even if the way that they might be experiencing and or managing their menopausal symptoms is different.
Yeah, and this is where menopause is very interesting on a sociological and a sociological basis, because different cultures appreciate menopause in a different way. And I think we should move away from positive or negative. It's actually we just look upon it in different ways. And in many cultures, menopause is seen in a very positive light, because it's the end of menstruation and moving into a different role within a community, really important. Whilst in Western societies, we have quite a negative connotation about menopause. And of course, there are issues, but actually trying to understand how we all, as in everybody, looks at menopause. We need to look at how everybody looks at menopause, rather than come into it with a defined set of this is what it looks like and this is what it means to everybody, because it means different things to everybody. And certain groups of people will have different types of symptoms based on their ethnicity and their genetics. So some groups of people will experience more vasomotor symptoms than other groups of people. And it's really interesting. And there's lots of reasons for that. But actually understanding that everybody will have different symptoms, and as you say, Eileen, at different times, is really important. So I spend a lot of time, and I'll speak to women and I'll say, well, what was your mum's menopause? They're like, oh, my mum didn't have any menopause symptoms. That's what she's told me. Bet she did, but she probably just hasn't recounted them or experienced in a time or a place where those feelings couldn't be spoken about. I mean, I'm sure that in times of war and famine, menopause symptoms aren't probably discussed that much. And it's certainly in different cultures, they are described differently. So I think that understanding of it's different for different people is really important. So, and there isn't a defined time. So I'll see 1% of women will actually have a very early menopause under 40. So it's, that 1% is not actually that small, really important. 10% under 45. So this isn't like that's already, changing a taboo, understanding that, because most people think menopause symptoms happen only to women in their 50s, but actually 10% of women will have symptoms under the age of 45, and lots and lots of women will have, symptoms 46, 47. So it's actually understanding it's a demographic that we may not always appreciate, and these symptoms may go on into their 60s, late 60s. So there's a widespread, and those symptoms are different for different people. So actually exploring and understanding that there are different symptoms at different stages is part of that process, a very important part of that process.
That's great. And yeah, I guess our point is that when an organization is putting a policy in place, to make sure that understanding is reflected in the policy. And just to sort of quantify the figures that you were just talking about, given that there are an estimated 13 million women going through menopause or perimenopause in the UK today, that would mean you're saying about 100,000 of those, or 130,000, maybe started experiencing it before they turned 40 years old. And certainly over 1 million probably did before they turned 45. So it is a lot of people, and it is probably affecting workplaces that are probably represented on our call today. So that was the first point we were talking about with respect to what a company can do to support women going through menopause at work, which is implementing a policy. And we've just touched on a couple of points that we think are really, really important to highlight in a policy. I want to move on to the second point, which you'd also already alluded to or sort of foreshadowed because you talked about educating and education and information. And for us, I think at Fertifa, we would advocate that when putting a policy in place, the second most important point is to make sure that educating HR managers and team managers, team leads, is part of that policy. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about that, Gidon.
It's again just an openness of culture and to explain to team leaders that that policy needs to be quite dynamic and allowing people to have different approaches to how they work. And I know that you're never going to have this nirvana of fantastic, perfect workspace because just life isn't like that. But really, it's just an appreciation for individuals that there needs to be a bit of flexibility. So, for instance, and we come back to the sleep thing, is that sleep problems are very common in the perimenopause, really common for lots and lots of reasons. And actually, if possible, not scheduling important meetings for 8 or 8:30 in the morning. And I know that may sound a bit wishy-washy and a bit soft, but if you're sleep deprived, you will perform badly. We all know that it's not a question. So actually thinking about how we flex our days and our working schedules to allow that. And actually, what is it about hybrid working that can help with this? And actually allowing not just flexibility in the timings of working, but where we are working. Home environments are taken to be better than work environments for if you're struggling a little bit for lots and lots of reasons, toileting and temperature and comfort of clothing. So I think when we're building policies, it's actually not just the office space important or the office clothing important, but actually how we schedule the day and actually the location of work. So it's an environmental aspect that we really need to consider for that individual.
Yeah, so those are super examples of, where we would want a policy to talk about educating HR managers and team leads so that they are aware of all those points that Gideon made. I would also suggest as part of that educational piece that there's signposting to other benefits that an organization might already have in place, whether it's an in-house GP, maybe access to counseling, maybe it's access to other resources, for example. And then, of course, we would suggest that there are workshops, there are genuinely educational materials, whether that's library type access to something like the Fertifa app or something from another company that's within the sector, or their webinars, their workshops, or they're just learning opportunities for the organization, but most importantly, to make sure that team leads and managers are able to support. We've heard so many anecdotes of individuals, women going to say their line manager. We had somebody that we just heard about yesterday where they'd gone to a male line manager and he had actually said, actually, why don't you speak to a female colleague because I don't really, I'm not really equipped to have this conversation with you. As if that wasn't unfortunately disheartening enough. Then when they went to a female colleague, the female colleague's first reaction was, aren't you a bit young to be asking about menopause? Or surely that's probably not menopause because of your age. And so again, we had individuals who just weren't informed enough, unfortunately. So I think in addition to getting the policy in place, we would suggest you do want to have education and training at a minimum for HR managers and line managers, if not the whole organization available to them. Were you going to say something else, Kidden?
Yeah, I was just thinking there that there are, when we're dealing with the menopause in the very simplest way, it's the very basic understanding that there is a multimodal approach to helping and actually understanding that. And I think when that manager was when that person was approached, it's the kind of the thing is, I don't know anything about it. Maybe they don't know anything about supplements, or they don't know anything about medication, or they're just worried they're going to get um, uh, in trouble for some sort of discrimination. I kind of just think, actually, so when there is a policy, the first bit of the policy is menopause affects lots of things, and there are lots of answers. And here are some of the signposts to those answers. And I just think that's probably, like a really great entry point into answering that question.
No, absolutely. So as you say, signposting is part of the educational piece. So we've talked about the policy, we've talked about educational pieces, and I think the third point that we at Fertifa would advocate for in terms of what types of support can be offered in a workplace for menopause would be clinical support. And so it might sound convenient that we're suggesting this. We're not at all suggesting it has to be from Fertifa. We obviously have peers in the sector that also do the same. There's also other resources. There are charities. There's other sources for getting individuals clinical support. But I think safe to say we believe clinical support is really starting to become really important because we are talking about health and we're talking about conversations where people are probably going through a journey in terms of understanding their symptoms and how to manage this. Don't know, again, if there's anything you wanted to add to this, Gidon, or to talk about how we do provide the clinical support and maybe some case studies or how we do that at Fertifa.
Thanks. Thanks. When I think about this, I think about it in the way of, like, we're all trying to promote services, and that's okay as long as your service is unbiased, it's helpful, uh, and it's not to the detriment of the individual or to the company. So whenever I'm thinking about advice, and I kind of think this may be because I've been brought up through the NHS system that tries to be independent, is that the advice should be understandable to all, so that means languages and words that people understand. I mean, I spend a lot of my time just, explaining very fundamental, basic biological frameworks. So it's actual clear education for individuals, line managers, companies. It's very clear about what is happening, why it's happening, and unbiased information about what you can do. Now, before the webinar today, I was actually just trying to find a very simple question, which was an answer to a very simple question: is what percentage of women between ages 45 and 55 take HRT regularly? It's a difficult one, and actually, it's less than 50%. Okay, so it's less than 50%. So most women aren't using it. Why aren't they using it? For good reasons or for other reasons. But it's the explanation, understanding that there are lots and lots of answers in an unbiased fashion that is the most important thing. So you were talking about signposting and where information is coming from. There's so many great resources. I like to think we're a great resource, but there are other great resources that are unbiased that can provide the individual and the company with really, really good information that doesn't have another agenda, i.e., is not going to make money out of the situation that the individual or the company finds themselves. There's lots of good stuff out there, but I think the important thing is it's clear, it's understandable, and it's unbiased.
No, that's brilliant. And maybe I'll just add some color to that in terms of if there are some people who are watching who aren't familiar with how we deliver the service, they might be sort of, reasonably asking, well, how could they be unbiased? They've sold a service. And just to clarify, the way Fertifa works, and I think others that we would describe as peers in the sector, we're selling to the organization. And so once the organization has signed up to making Fertifa available to employees, we're done. That's our business model, selling to the organization. Once we're there and available to employees, we don't have a vested interest nor an economic interest, nor do we get more money, make more revenue, or get any commission from either encouraging, say, HRT or not, dissuading people from getting prescriptions or encouraging it, going to the NHS to save money, or going to a private clinic to spend more money. We have no sort of skin in any of those games because we are delivering a service to the company, and we've already ticked that box by getting access to its employees or being available to employees to access our clinical support. And so then and thereafter, for the employee, we are simply there as the unbiased, independent medical opinion and advice, so that one could say, I've got this information from my GP, what should I ask next? Or what would you say in addition to that? Or I've gone to a private clinic and they've said I should sign up or pay for that. What do you think of that? And we are solely there as a patient advocate and to be a sounding board for the employee to talk through all of those things. And so that is what I think, you're talking about, getting when you say the independent, unbiased clinical support is what we're emphasizing. So just to recap, I think what we were just talking through were the three biggest components we would suggest are essential for offering menopause support in a workplace, because often we're asked, what does it mean? Does it mean, is menopause support offering fans at desks? And actually what we think three most important points of supporting individuals through going through menopause at work are, first and foremost, having a policy in place. Secondly, education and awareness. And we'd start first with line managers and HR managers, but obviously we think that that should be available, including signposting to everybody. And then thirdly, it would be that clinical support, like we talked about, and particularly unbiased, independent medical advice, so that it's credible and believable for employees. I think, I know it's already close to a quarter till, and I'd mentioned that, wanted to give people some time back, but I really feel like if we don't touch on one other topic, if you can indulge me, I feel like it's a bit of the elephant in the room, because we've seen a lot of press in the last week about the fact that the EHRC has issued guidance about cautioning or bringing to employers' attention the fact that there might be the potential for claims against disability if workplaces aren't fully supporting women at work. And I think it's really important for us just to touch on that a little bit, because I think a question could be, does that actually change anything? What does that mean? Are there any practical implications of that? And I'd love your view as a clinician and a medical provider and practitioner. And then I'll probably chime in with my view from a commercial point of view, if that's okay.
Thanks. There has been a lot of debate on this, and it's interesting. And my initial feelings were that it's good that we're trying to create legislation that makes looking after your employees a necessary thing, and I think that's okay. And I am very for this, but I appreciate that menopause in itself shouldn't be defined as a disability, because how many very strong, able, productive women are there over the age of 50 in the workplace? Lots, most. And we shouldn't. And I think one of the concerns is that actually you're pigeonholing people because of their age and because of their sex, and that is just fundamentally wrong. But it's important that people are looked after properly, and if the employees aren't looking after their employees properly, then there should be legislation in place to address that.
Thank you for that. And I think that, but I feel like we should be really transparent and open for everyone on this call. We've had, even you and I and other colleagues at Fertifa, we've had really, actually, I think, really valuable debates and discussions about this. So we saw the news when everyone else saw the news, and it came out a day before the actual report and the guidance came out, and we had a back and forth about it, just looking at all of the different angles and all the different responses and reactions. And I think you're right, Gidon. I think all of us, given what we do at Fertifa, I think the more attention and the more conversation and dialogue there is about menopause, and frankly, women's reproductive health, as well as men's reproductive health altogether, that there is, the more dialogue there is about this, the better. None of these conversations have been happening enough. It's about time. We're clearly late, but late is better than never. And so having these conversations and bringing it all to the fore is a positive thing. To your point, Gidon, if there is going to be, whether it's legislation or it's simply pressure from business groups or other policymakers or advisors, or simply to strengthen individuals' confidence to ask for, legislating the fact that people and organizations should look after women who are going through menopause and offer support, that's also a good thing as well. We did then talk about the risk of, and I guess one of the reasons I felt we weren't at a place where talking about menopause was normalized enough yet is because, expressly because, women felt they would probably get penalized, or they feared being penalized, or being frankly written off or undermined if they admitted to something that was affecting their performance. And so then associating it with a disability could maybe be unhelpful, even though the intention, I think, is to draw more attention to it and the need for workplaces to support women. So there's sort of always everything in extreme is probably too much, but somewhere in the middle there, hopefully it increases the amount of conversation and discussion and discourse about it. Hopefully it increases the amount of support that's going to be offered in workplaces. Hopefully it's not going to be used as a label to undermine women who are already doing fantastic work day in and day out. So thanks for letting me touch on that a bit. Two more things I guess I wanted to cover. One, somebody has kindly noted in the Q&A a question, which I think is a great question, even though we didn't directly sort of say it, or we hoped we'd alluded to it, but I think it gives me the opportunity to maybe reframe things or summarize things. And they ask how best to open up conversations in the workplace and what is practical advice in terms of how to start this. And I do think the best thing would be is if someone's in a position of an HR function or a people function, or even a leader within the organization themselves and has the ability to do this and to influence it, is to get a menopause policy in place. Trust me, asking the question about whether or not we should have, as an organization, a menopause policy, or where is the menopause policy, or shall we update our policies to include menopause, that will definitely open up conversations in the workplace. Now, if the question is meant to say, how do you open up positive conversations in the workplace? I think the process of developing the policy or refining the policy will do that. But another way to have the conversations is probably through employee networks and employee groups, if not directly with leadership. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Gidon.
Yeah, something we haven't. I do. Thanks. I think that having a policy is the beginning of a way to start the discussion. I suppose my concern about policies is actually how much of it just remains within the HR or person departments, and actually how much of it expands to the wider group. So we focus on this and we address the HR individuals and processes, but actually how much of it filters out. We're really fanatical about it, obviously, but actually how much of it filters out to the greater workforce? And I don't know the answer to that. I think the conversations and the frameworks, as you're saying, Eileen, are important. I think one thing we haven't discussed actually is, and I don't like the word, I don't know what the right word is. I'm going to say menopause champions, but menopause focuses or focal people within the department or within the little bits here and there, and actually to allow groups or individuals within the company as a whole to have their own little nodes of menopausedom. So you have a menopause champion in there or here, and actually because this, so the most important thing about being a menopause person, therapist, clinician, whatever, is actually to be empathetic and to listen to people's struggles and what's happening to people. You don't need to have the answers of what you should do, but actually to hear, to have the time to listen to people. So actually having these nodes, these menopause, what should we, I don't want to use the word champion because
I
that's
think
kind of
champion's
like,
okay.
is
Advocate.
it
Yeah,
advocate? Yeah,
advocate
yeah,
is okay as well. But that's what I meant sort of when talking about the employee networks, because usually you
yeah,
find an ally or someone
yeah.
who's maybe willing to go. So that's a really great point. And your first point there about how much a policy stays within a people function or the HR function, or whether or not it actually gets disseminated and absorbed throughout the organization, is so on point, because we saw in our opening poll, and I kind of alluded to this, I think it was 11% of people responded that they didn't know if their workplace had a policy in place. And so even if all of them did have policies, the fact that the individuals answering our poll didn't know that they existed or not is exactly the problem you're talking about. So again, to the question, I think the way to start the conversations in the workplace is probably to start talking about a policy. And then to your point, Gideon, once you've got a policy, it's really important that there's internal comms to make sure that people are aware this exists. And I don't just mean women, by the way, who are going through perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms. It's also important for managers and other people within the organization to know about that too. So thank you so much. So I think the other thing I realized when you were talking about how, there are a couple of things we haven't actually gotten a chance to touch on is sort of why this is important. And we didn't ask people if they had their own views as to why, but I guess we thought as a self-selecting group, and thank you again for all of you for giving up the hour to be with us. I think it's important to underscore, especially as we've worked now with so many different workplace clients, how and why support for an organization and menopause for the people is really beneficial. And I just want to say it's really, we've seen now quantifiable data about the ability to attract, recruit, retain people, especially when those women are at their probably career peak because of the tenure, their networks, the experiences they've gone through. And then also more broadly, not even just the individuals who are going through it, as a piece of an inclusive workforce and an inclusive culture for everyone, whether they're going to be male, female, going through menopause or not. It just drives stronger outcomes because individuals will probably feel more productive and more greater fulfillment working for a workplace that they know prioritizes their well-being. So with that said, I had promised some time back. I'd said at least 5 minutes, and I'm coming close to not being able to fulfill that promise or follow up on it. So I'll just do another quick recap because, Gidon, I want you to fill in if I've missed or left anything out. But I think what we spoke about in terms of, why and how to best support women through menopause in the workplace, we described putting in place a policy. We described signposting to education and awareness and starting with line managers as well as HR professionals. And then we talked about the importance of clinical support. Is there anything else you'd add? I mean, we talked about inclusivity and making sure that we recognize the breadth of symptoms, primary symptoms, secondary symptoms. We talked about quite a lot actually now. I'd say, but anything else you'd want to end on?
No, I think we got it. Yeah, I think we got it all there. I think we got it all there.
Thank you. I know what you're thinking there, though, because we could talk hours and hours, and we do, which is why we both love the work that we do. And we will continue this conversation, and we'll hopefully have another webinar and have the chance to speak to all of you again, too. But before we sign off, I did want to thank you, Gidon, for giving us this time to talk about this and to answer some of the questions that we've had in. I also want to thank everyone, like I said, for giving up the time to join us, and particularly those of you who shared your thoughts in the Q&A. And I appreciate many of you did that. Anonymously, some of you did that with your identities as well. And we're really grateful, though, to make it more engaging because, like I said, Gidon and I probably debate enough as it is. We don't need a webinar to do this. So we really appreciate all of you doing that as well. And for all of your feedback now in the chat. That's really kind. So with that said, thank you again from all of us at Fertifa. We wish you a very pleasant, fulfilling, gratifying International Women's Day. We appreciate your recognition of the best way to support and recognize women is think about how to support them in the workplace. And we're really hoping to get the chance to do that with all of you. So thank you, Gidon. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.